All right, Noah, let's take a look at your essay. So I want to talk about your thesis right away. Your thesis is really good in your introduction because it's just very concise and clear with what you are going to be talking about. Media is more potent because it's able to get a message off quickly, can be used to spread misinformation, and can be used to shift a person's idea. I think this is pretty good, and I think you've got a good thesis to work with, which makes it easier, obviously, with all this going on. So, um, where was I going with that? Anyways, with the rest of your introduction, so let's start with your hook. You do need a stronger hook because this does fall into one of the categories of one of the introductions that's not as effective, which is we see this, or I know it was worded in since the beginning of time. This has happened, or whatever. But you still have something. We see this again and again in humanity's history. Why? Not super strong. You could probably rephrase it in the sense of, I don't know, something more along the lines of just being hysterical in some way and how that may affect us in whatever method it could be. I just a different hook because this falls into one of the weaker categories. And then even as you explain it, you have a contraction here, and then you have a punctuation concern as well. If you're saying it's simple, the way you have that set up is you need to have a colon follow simple, or you just need a period because it's simple mass hysteria. It doesn't quite make sense, but you do have this, which is okay. Media outlet would make it extremely potent, and without media, comma, mass hysteria would not be as effective. You do need some kind of comma here too. That's what's kind of throwing me off. Imagine if the crucibles, and then you need an apostrophe here. Time period had a YouTube or Twitter cause mass witch hunt, mass witch hunt outbreak to spread across the nation. So this is okay. I think you're getting a little bit on the borderline of too hypothetical with it. Um, but the other thing I'm going to point out, which may not seem like a big deal, but it is, the Crucibles time period. I'm not sure if you're talking about when the play was published, which is the 50s, or if you're talking about. Well, actually, let me stop there. Let's talk about it because the reason why this hypothetical could be tricky, and part of it may be how you spread it, is if you talk about the Crucible, Arthur Miller wrote that as a response to the way people were talking about communism, and that's why it's a problem here because it was spread nationwide. If you talk about Salem witch trials, then it's a little bit different, so you need to specify that right there. But overall, the introduction is okay. You you need a stronger hook, in your but your thesis is good. Okay. As we move on to your next first body paragraph, media is able to amplify mass hysteria through a Twitter post or YouTube video. I think this is a really, really strong topic sentence in the way that you end the paragraph as well. Big cases of mass hysteria will continue to grow as media becomes bigger. So this is pretty good. I think this sums up what the paragraph sums up with what you have with the topic sentence pretty well. So when you go into that, you talk about the example with the Charlie Charlie challenge, and it was spread globally, caused millions to believe in a supernatural being called Charlie. Syria would not have grown if media didn't. You've got that contraction again. And then Spirit called Charlie. You should technically capitalize it, and then you should have South capitalized here. So it looks like there's a little bit of some capitalization concerns I want you to be cognizant of. This is here we not had. This should be have grown. If media did not get involved, it would have just stayed a local legend. Here's the problem with this. Hysteria would not have grown if media did not get involved and would have stayed a local legend. This right here connects most recently to media. So the way I read this the first time is I was thinking you're trying to say media should have stayed a local legend. So be clear and more specific that the Charlie Charlie challenge should have stayed a local legend. And then because you're using an additional example, you want to use some kind of transitional word or phrase. So say something like, additionally, a Pokemon episode called this aired in 1997, and then you're explaining it. Where did I just miss this? And then this could have caused a global outbreak. And I think this is really good when we talk about the banning of it, is you have that global effect and how that specific form of media can increase mass hysteria. And so this is all pretty good. You have a good way of balancing your evidence with your analysis. I think that's really strong. I think there's some word concerns you should consider. And then there was something else. This right here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from seeing this challenge, when it went viral, and then reading the article, I can tell you, I don't think people believed in a supernatural being called Charlie, but there was the mass hysteria outbreak where there were a few people who didn't, but that wasn't the millions. So maybe if you rephrase this in a way of the mass hysteria in the sense of creating a viral trend and then it does affect people in some way as a result, I think that would work better. But overall, your balance of evidence with analysis is pretty good. So as you move on to your next paragraph, the ability of misinformation is good. Trump able to use false statements about Hillary. You need to capitalize her name. Like saying how, well, let's talk about this. Using like is a terrible, crappy word that a lot of you use over and over again, and it's just been beaten to death, and it's just kind of a weak word. So you could just say Trump was able to use false statements about Hillary. I don't know. I think it's just this phrase that's throwing me off. So maybe even doing something with Trump was able to use false statements about Hillary, for example, stating that Ambassador Stevens, blah, blah, blah. And so all of this with the quotes and everything is pretty good, and you have some good analysis with here. And I think this is actually really interesting. We don't talk about this a lot. You have an emotional appeal that I do not see a whole lot with your argumentative essays. And this does hinge a little bit on the hypothetical, but it's good because you're talking about how people get emotionally invested in these things. So I think that's a good thing to do that. And as we move on, you talk about the broadcast of the alien invasion, and again, misinformation being shown. Actually, now that I'm curious about this, shows. Okay, that's not as bad. I thought I was reading it earlier. And you don't use shows a whole lot, which is good, because that is definitely a word that gets beaten to death. And then as we move on to your final body paragraph, is this your final body? Yeah, that's your final body paragraph. Your topic sentence not the greatest because you use the word sure. So just say, so let's look at this. Sure, media was not as widespread back in the old days, and mass hysteria was usually spread by human nature in those times. Because you are acknowledging the fact, and actually look at this, without the media, mass hysteria would only be small scale and not as potent if it was prompted by human nature. Instead of just being like, yep, we didn't have media, so it was all human nature. Instead, you could do something along the lines of, oh, I just had it in my head. I'm so sorry. No, I lost it. Because you're going on the prompt of media being able to perpetuate human nature, saying something along the lines of, while, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm just adding filler time. I'm so sorry. Maybe just throwing in something there about how media exacerbates the problem, and then just acknowledge that you could say prior to having media, even though mass hysteria still existed, it was a small scale form because media exacerbates the problem. Something like that would be better because you're addressing that it did exist, people will see it's human nature, but the problem still is here, and now we have it because it's exacerbated by media. And then you have right here, you don't want to start a sentence with but, so I'm going to throw some conjunctions on your rubric. There's on Facebook or Instagram, we rely on media, easier for mass hysteria to be spread by media, which is true. So I think the only thing missing here is you need some specific examples for the opposing side. But other than that, you do refute it. Let's see. But you're just missing the specific examples with it. Okay. And then the combination of media mass hysteria is extremely potent. Without the media mass hysteria, would not be as effective as it is today. Great. Charlie challenge, spread misleading information, spread mass hysteria like it did. Whenever the next mass hysteria case pops up, you can be sure that media will, oh, you're missing a word, will be the spark that ignites the fire. I think this is a good way. I think it's a common phrase that people relate to. I think your conclusion is good. I think the style you have is good. You've got some good transitions. Your topic sentences are strong. You do have some of the grammar concerns. I think what I'm mostly noticing is your opposing side paragraph in your introduction could probably use the most work. And I think once you fix that, if you want to do a rewrite, that's up to you. I don't think you necessarily need to. But this is a pretty good paper. I think you have a good balance of evidence and analysis. So this is pretty good, and you've got good analysis with it. Like I said, just a few grammar things in the intro that can be a little spruced up.